In the middle of a bustling city park, where the sounds of rushing cars mixed with the laughter of families enjoying the afternoon, a little boy named Ethan moved quietly through the crowd. Unlike the other children playing on the swings or chasing each other across the grass, Ethan wasn't there to have fun. He was searching, digging through trash bins, picking up discarded cans, anything he could gather to exchange for a few coins. Life had never been easy for Ethan. With no family to return to and no warm bed waiting for him at night, survival was his only goal. But even in the toughest moments, his heart remained pure. As he reached for another can, something caught his eye, a sleek, expensive phone lying near a park bench. Its glossy surface was cracked, but the screen still glowed faintly, vibrating with incoming notifications. He stared at it for a moment, realizing that whoever lost it must be looking for it. Most people in his situation might have seen it as a stroke of luck, an easy way to make quick money. But Ethan wasn't like most people. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone, gripping it tightly. He didn't know who it belonged to, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to return it. Ethan sat on the edge of the bench, gripping the phone in his small hands, his fingers tracing the cracks on the screen. The city moved around him. Children laughed, joggers passed by, and pigeons pecked at the ground. But he barely noticed any of it. His focus was on one thing: finding the owner of this phone. He waited patiently, scanning the faces in the crowd, hoping someone would come back looking for it. Minutes turned into hours. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the park. His stomach growled in protest, reminding him that he hadn't eaten all day, but he ignored it. Ethan sighed, his fingers tightening around the phone. Maybe no one was coming back. Maybe the owner had already given up on finding it. He considered turning it in at a nearby shop or asking someone for help, but deep down, he feared being dismissed, or worse, being accused of stealing it. Just as he was about to leave, movement caught his eye. A man in a sharp, expensive suit came rushing into the park, his eyes darting around wildly. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and an air of authority about him. His suit looked like it cost more than everything Ethan had ever owned combined. The man's face was tense, his brow furrowed as he searched the area. His hands patted his pockets frantically before he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Ethan could tell this was the owner. Summoning his courage, Ethan stood up and stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said, holding out the phone. "Is this yours?" The man froze, his eyes snapping to Ethan. For a moment, he just stared, as if unable to believe what he was seeing. Then, with a mixture of relief and disbelief, he reached out and took the phone, his fingers brushing against Ethan's as he did. You found this?" the man asked, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it was on the ground near the bench." The man exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I've been looking everywhere for this. I thought it was gone for good." He glanced down at the boy, noticing for the first time the worn-out clothes, the dirt smudged on his hands, and the tattered backpack slung over his shoulder. His expression softened. "You could have kept it," the man said, studying Ethan's face. "Or sold it." Ethan shrugged, shifting his weight awkwardly. "It wasn't mine." A small smile tugged at the corners of the man's lips. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a neatly folded bill. "Here," he said, offering it to Ethan. "For your honesty." Ethan stared at the money. His stomach twisted at the thought of all the food it could buy, the warmth it could bring on the cold nights ahead. But then he shook his head. "I don't need a reward," he said, looking down at his shoes. "I just wanted to help." For a long moment, the man said nothing. He just looked at Ethan, something unreadable in his eyes. Finally, he put the money back in his pocket and knelt down to meet the boy at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ethan." "Ethan," the man repeated, as if committing it to memory. I'm Daniel Lawson. Ethan's eyes flickered with curiosity. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Daniel glanced around the park. Are you here alone? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Where do you live? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He knew from experience that telling the truth would lead to pity, maybe even trouble. But something about this man's gaze made it hard to lie. I don't really have a home, he admitted quietly. I just stay where I can. Daniel's face changed, a flicker of something, concern, sadness, or maybe understanding, crossing his features. He glanced down at the phone in his hands, as if realizing that this meeting wasn't just about a lost phone anymore. He stood up, dusting off his suit. Come with me, Ethan. Let's get you something to eat. Ethan's stomach growled in response, but he hesitated. Why? Daniel smiled. Because I want to help. Ethan looked into the man's eyes, searching for any trace of dishonesty. But all he saw was kindness, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something strange. Hope. As Ethan followed Daniel through the bustling city streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was unlike any other day. He had spent years keeping his head down, surviving on his own, expecting nothing from anyone. But this man, this stranger, was treating him like he mattered. They stopped at a small diner, where Daniel held the door open for him. Ethan hesitated for a second before stepping inside. The warmth hit him immediately, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air. Daniel motioned for Ethan to sit across from him in a booth, then ordered food without hesitation: pancakes, eggs, toast, and a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Ethan sat stiffly, unused to this kind of treatment, unsure if this was all just a dream that would disappear the moment he blinked. After a few moments of silence, Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious, but kind. Tell me about yourself, Ethan, he said. Where's your family? Ethan swallowed, poking at his pancakes with his fork. I don't have one, he admitted quietly. I live in a group home, but I don't stay there much. It's crowded. I like being on my own. Daniel didn't respond right away. He simply watched Ethan, taking in the way his shoulders tensed, the way he avoided eye contact. And school? He asked. I go sometimes, Ethan said, shrugging. But it's hard. No one really cares if I'm there or not. Daniel let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening slightly. He had seen poverty before, had even donated millions to charities trying to fight it. But sitting across from this boy, seeing the resilience in his eyes despite everything he had been through, something inside him shifted. Ethan finally gathered the courage to ask, Why do you care? Daniel smiled faintly. Because I know what it's like to have nothing, he admitted. I grew up in a rough part of the city. My parents worked day and night just to put food on the table. I didn't have much, but I had people who believed in me. Ethan looked up, intrigued. So what happened? Daniel chuckled. I got lucky. I studied hard, built my first company in my 20s, and now I run one of the biggest tech firms in the world. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, what? Daniel leaned back, smiling. Ever heard of Anderson Technologies? Ethan's fork clattered against his plate. Anderson Technologies wasn't just a company, it was the company. The name was everywhere, on computers, phones, even billboards in Times Square. He had just returned a phone to that Anderson. You're that guy? Ethan asked, barely believing it. Daniel nodded. And right now, I want to help you. Ethan froze. No one had ever said those words to him before. No one had ever wanted to help him. His hands clenched the edge of the table, his heart pounding. What? What does that mean? He asked hesitantly. Daniel's voice was steady, filled with certainty. It means I'm not letting you go back to that group home. You deserve better, Ethan. You deserve a real chance at life. Ethan's throat tightened. Are you saying? Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with something Ethan had never seen directed at him before. Genuine care. I want to adopt you, Ethan. Ethan sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what Daniel had just said. I want to adopt you, Ethan. No one had ever said those words to him before. No one had ever even hinted at wanting him, at choosing him. His whole life, he had been passed around, first from shelter to shelter, then into the crowded group home where he had learned quickly that attachments only led to disappointment. His fingers tightened around his fork, his heart pounding. Why? He finally whispered. Daniel didn't hesitate. Because you deserve better, he said simply. Because you did the right thing when no one was watching. And because I see something in you, Ethan. Something special. Ethan stared at him, searching for any trace of a lie, any sign that this was some cruel joke. But Daniel's eyes held only sincerity. But I'm just... Ethan trailed off, struggling to find the words. I'm nobody. Daniel shook his head. No, Ethan, you're somebody, and you matter. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He wasn't sure if it was hope or fear. Hope that this was real, or fear that if he believed it, it would all be taken away. Think about it, Daniel said gently. No pressure, no rush. But if you want a real home, a fresh start, I'm here. Ethan barely remembered eating the rest of his meal. His mind was spinning. Could this really happen? Could he really have a family? Weeks later, Ethan stood in the doorway of a massive house. No, a mansion. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The floors gleamed, the ceilings stretched high, and the air smelled fresh, like cinnamon and wood polish. He shifted uncomfortably, still half expecting to wake up in the group home. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Welcome home, Ethan. The words hit him like a tidal wave. Home. A real home. A woman, Daniel's wife, Sophia, walked over with a warm smile. We've been waiting for you, sweetheart, she said, wrapping him in a gentle hug. Ethan stiffened at first, unaccustomed to affection, but as she held him, something inside him cracked. Years of loneliness, of longing, of wondering if he would ever truly belong. His eyes stung with unshed tears. Thank you, he whispered. Sophia pulled back, cupping his face with a mother's tenderness. You don't have to thank us, Ethan. We're just so happy you're here. Daniel chuckled. Come on, I'll show you your room. Ethan followed him upstairs, his breath catching when he saw it. The room was his. Not a bunk in a shelter, not a corner in a crowded home, but his own space. A bed with fresh sheets, a desk, shelves with books, even a basketball sitting in the corner like it had been waiting for him. He stepped inside hesitantly, running his fingers over the wooden desk. This is really mine? He asked softly. Daniel smiled. Everything here is yours, Ethan. This is your home now. Ethan turned to look at him, his defenses breaking down piece by piece. For the first time in his life, he felt safe, he felt wanted, and for the first time, he truly believed that he belonged.